My family spent 17 years treating me like I caused my brother's accident. When the truth finally came out, nobody said sorry. Then my brother asked me to be his best man. 17 years of being the family scapegoat for something I didn't do. When the truth came out, my brother's response was, "Dad already addressed that. Can you be my best man?" My name is Nathan Coyle. I am 36 years old, and I spent 17 years being blamed by my family for something that was not my fault. I want to say that at the beginning, plainly and without softening it, because the story I am about to tell is long and the details matter, and I do not want anyone to miss the fact that sits at the center of all of it. I did not cause the accident. There was documentation proving this from the very beginning. Documentation I obtained and showed to my father within 2 weeks of the accident happening. He chose to dismiss it. He chose a narrative that served some purpose I have spent years trying to understand, and he held that narrative for 17 years, and my family organized itself around it. That is the center of this story. Everything else follows from it. I need to tell you who everyone is, because the people in this story matter, and I want you to understand them before I describe what they did. My father's name is Gordon. He is 64 years old. He spent most of his working life in industrial supply management, practical, demanding work that required real competence and that he was good at. He is a stubborn man in the particular way of men who have built their sense of identity around being right. He is not unintelligent, and he is not a cruel person in the simple sense of the word. He is someone who, once he has decided something, finds it very difficult to undecide it, not because he is incapable of recognizing error, but because acknowledging error feels to him like something close to collapse. He loves his family, in the way of men of his generation, through provision and presence and reliability rather than through words. He has never been entirely comfortable with me, his older son, in a way I could not fully explain as a child and that I understand better now. I think the narrative he built about the accident served, somewhere underneath, a purpose that was not entirely about the accident. My mother's name is Darlene. She is 62. She is a genuinely warm woman who has spent her life trying to hold the family together through the various things that pull at families. Her strategy for doing this, for as long as I can remember, has been to defer to my father on anything contentious. Not out of weakness, she is not a weak person, but out of a calculation she made early and that became a habit and that the habit made permanent. She deferred to Gordon about the accident the way she deferred to him about everything, and in doing so she became, through omission, part of what was done to me. My brother Derek is 33. He is 3 years younger than me, which made him 16 at the time of the accident. He is charming in the way of people who have always found that their personality eases their way through difficult things. He is genuinely likable, easy to be around, funny when he wants to be, the kind of person who moves through rooms without generating friction. He is also someone who has consistently chosen the easier thing when the easier and harder things were in conflict. Over 17 years, the harder thing would have been to say, "The accident was not Nathan's fault, I know it, and the way this family has handled it is wrong." The easier thing was silence. He chose the easier thing. He chose it at 16, which I understand. He kept choosing it for 17 more years, which I do not accept the same way. My cousin Ryan is 34. He broke his collarbone in the accident. He healed completely. He lives in Charlottesville now, and we see each other occasionally at large family gatherings. He has never addressed the accident with me directly, and I have not pushed him to. I do not know exactly what version of events he was given or how much he understood about what the mechanic found. I do not hold any of this against him. He was young. He was hurt. He healed. He moved on. That is its own reasonable story. Now I will tell you what happened. I was 19 years old in the summer when the accident occurred. My brother Derek was 16. We lived with our parents in Roanoke, Virginia, a house on a residential street with a long, steep hill at one end. There was an older sedan in the driveway that my father had bought secondhand when I was about 15, a car the whole family used for various trips and errands. A few weeks before the accident, I had done an oil change on that car. I had done it before. I knew how to do it. I did it correctly. I have never had any uncertainty about this. Derek took the car out one afternoon with Ryan in the passenger seat. They were heading down the long residential grade near our house, a hill with a meaningful pitch and a stop sign at the bottom where it meets a busier cross street. The brakes failed. The car ran the stop sign and crossed the intersection and came to rest against the curb on the far side. Derek was not hurt. Ryan's collarbone broke when the impact threw him forward. The accident could have been significantly worse. The intersection happened to be lightly traveled at that moment, and the car came to rest before striking anything more dangerous. Ryan healed completely in the months that followed. I was at work when it happened. My mother called me. I went directly to where Derek and Ryan were, and then to the hospital with Ryan, and then home. I remember the day the way you remember days when something has changed, not every detail, but the texture of it. The question of what had failed in the car came up immediately. My father took the vehicle to Ed, the mechanic he had been using for years. Ed knew that car. My father asked him to examine the braking system and determine what had gone wrong. Ed found a corroded brake line. A section of the line had developed a failure point from accumulated rust and age, the kind of deterioration that builds invisibly over time in an older vehicle whose brake lines have not been inspected regularly. The failure had been developing for some time. It had nothing to do with an oil change. The oil system and the brake system are completely separate. The work I had done on the engine could not have caused or contributed to what Ed found in the brake line. There was no connection. Ed documented this in writing, professionally and without hedging. I asked for a copy. I was 19 years old and I needed to be able to show my father, in writing, from a professional who had worked on the car for years, that what had happened was not connected to anything I had done. I showed my father Ed's written assessment on a Sunday afternoon, about 10 days after the accident. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and I put the document between us and I explained what it said. He looked at it. He appeared to read it. Then he pushed it back across the table toward me. He said Ed was probably just being kind to me. He said brake lines do not fail on their own for no reason. He said if I had been more careful when I was under the hood of that car, Ryan would not have a broken collarbone. I said, Dad, I did not touch the brake lines. The oil system and the brakes are separate systems. This is what Ed found. He said, you were under the hood. Something went wrong. I cannot pretend those two things do not connect. I was 19. I said what needed to be said. He was not receiving it. I did not have yet the confidence, the tools, the understanding of how to hold my ground in the face of a parent who had made up his mind to take it further. After a certain point I stopped, because continuing was not going anywhere and remaining in that exchange was costing me something I could feel but could not name. I left the kitchen with Ed's report still in my hands. My father had not kept it. He had pushed it back to me and decided the matter and closed it. Once the decision was made, it did not soften. It hardened. Over the following months, it moved from accusation to assumption, from assumption to family history, from family history to a fixed feature of how we understood ourselves. Ryan healed and went back to his life. Derek went back to his. I went back to mine, except that my life now had this designation in it. The person who had been careless. The person who had caused the accident. The person who had hurt someone. The way it appeared over the years was almost never dramatic. I want to say this clearly because I think it matters for understanding how these dynamics survive as long as they do. It is rarely the open confrontation. It is the accumulation of small things, year after year, that no single one of which would constitute evidence on its own, but that together form a very clear pattern. The way my father would not quite meet my eyes when questions of my competence or judgment came up. The way the accident would surface as a story at family gatherings, not an outright accusation, but shaped in a way that left my responsibility implied and everyone in the room understanding the implication without it being stated. The particular coolness my Aunt Shirley, Ryan's mother, maintained toward me for years. The way Ryan himself, who had healed and built his own life and bore me no particular malice, would occasionally look at me across a table with an expression I understood even when I could not decode its exact contents. These things added up. Year after year they added up, each one small enough to dismiss individually, together forming something that had real weight. They formed the shape of who I was in my own family. The one who had caused the accident. The one you were slightly careful around. The one whose presence in a room carried a low charge of something unresolved and unspoken. And my brother Derek, who had been driving that day, who had walked away without a scratch, who I believe understood what Ed had found as well as anyone, simply never said anything to correct any of it. Not once. Not in 17 years. I have thought about Derek's silence more carefully than almost anything else in this story. I understand part of it. He was 16 when it happened, and he was the driver, and carrying that, being behind the wheel when your cousin gets hurt, regardless of whether the mechanical failure was anyone's fault, is its own weight. I do not believe he sat down at 16 and calculated that letting the blame fall on me was the advantageous move. I think he was young and scared, and the existing story was easier than the story that would have required him to do something genuinely hard. But he was not 16 for 17 years. He grew up. He became an adult with a full adult's capacity to understand what he was doing and to make a different choice. He had every year of those 17, every holiday, every gathering, every casual mention of the accident and the implication that hung in the air, in which he could have said, "That is not what the mechanic found. The brake line corroded. It was not Nathan. I know that." He did not say it. He chose, in each of those moments, not to say it. Not out of evil, but out of the preference for the easier path that he has always had, and that cost only me in this particular case. I spent my 20s navigating around the situation rather than through it. I showed up to family events because disappearing would have been its own kind of statement, and I was not ready to make one. I kept things light. I watched what I said. I was present and functional and pleasant in family settings while the underlying current ran beneath everything, constant and unchanged, and I got very good at swimming against it without letting anyone see the effort. It did not work well. The current was always there. I just stopped naming it aloud. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from performing normalcy in a situation that is not normal, year after year, gathering after gathering. You learn the shape of every room before you enter it. You learn which relatives will engage you warmly, and which ones have absorbed enough of the family story that they approach you with a slight reserve. You learn how to fill silences that would otherwise become awkward, how to redirect conversations that are moving toward the subject, how to laugh in the right places and deflect in the right places and leave at the right time so that you do not overstay a welcome that was never fully extended in the first place. You get good at all of this the way you get good at any repetitive, difficult thing. Through practice and through the slow understanding that this is simply the condition of being in this family, and that you do not have an alternative if you want to remain part of it. For about a decade, I accepted that condition. I told myself it was manageable. I told myself that the underlying dynamic was not so bad, that I was perhaps reading too much into looks across tables and stories told certain ways, that my father had his flaws and my family had its patterns, and that all families had patterns and mine were no worse than most. I do not believe that now, but I believed it then, or I believed it enough to keep showing up. What I could not sustain indefinitely was the effect that the showing up had on me between the gatherings. That is the part that people who have not lived inside this kind of dynamic sometimes miss. The gatherings themselves were survivable. It was the accumulation in the spaces between them. The way I would spend the days before a family event in a particular kind of low-grade dread. The way I would spend the days after one processing what had happened and cataloging the small moments and trying to decide whether they meant what I thought they meant. The weight of it was not concentrated in any single incident. It was spread across years, evenly and constantly, like a low persistent hum that I had learned to tune out, but that was affecting me regardless. I started seeing a therapist in my late 20s. Not specifically for this. I went initially because I was carrying a persistent anxiety I could not locate a source for, and a low-level sense of worthlessness that had no obvious origin, and a pattern I noticed in myself of bracing for judgment in situations where no judgment was coming. Something was generating these things, and I wanted to understand what. Working with the therapist over a couple of years, I traced it back, not to a single event, but to the long pattern that had been in place since I was 19. The message my family had been sending me, consistently, through looks and stories and a particular quality of temperature in rooms when I walked into them, was that my judgment was not to be trusted, that I had been careless when it mattered, that I had caused harm to someone I loved. I had absorbed this message the way people absorb the sustained assessments of those who were supposed to know them best. I had come, in some part of myself that I could not access directly, to half believe something that was not true. The intellectual understanding had always been there. I had always known, in the front part of my mind, that Ed's assessment was accurate and that the accusation was false. The problem was not intellectual. The problem was that 17 years of a contrary message from the people closest to you moves past the intellect and lodges somewhere deeper, somewhere the intellect alone cannot reach. Getting to that deeper place, unwinding what the message had done, took years of consistent work. Not a breakthrough, but a slow accumulation of clarity. The way mornings gradually become lighter in late winter before you can point to a single day and say, here is where it changed. That process took until my early 30s. By 35, I had stopped going to most family events. Not dramatically, not with an announcement or a confrontation I had been building toward. I became quietly unavailable. Holidays, I had other plans. Gatherings, I could not make it. I kept the minimum: a call on my father's birthday, a text at Christmas, enough to not cut ties completely, but not enough to keep presenting myself regularly to a room where the story about me had not changed in 16 years. The decision to step back did not feel like victory. People sometimes assume it would. It felt like grief, the specific grief of finally admitting that the family relationship you had been trying to maintain did not exist in the form you had been trying to maintain it in, and that the gap between what you had been reaching for and what was actually there was not something that more effort on your part was going to close. I had been trying for 16 years. The thing I had been trying for was not there. Stopping the trying was sad in a way I had not anticipated. Then my father had a health scare. He was 64. He went in for something he thought was routine and came out with a diagnosis serious enough to require a hospital stay for monitoring and the beginning of a treatment plan. The family gathered. I went. I had not been in a room with all of them for a significant stretch, and I stood in my father's hospital room on a Tuesday evening prepared for a difficult visit, but not for what actually happened. I want to describe that room for a moment because the setting matters. Hospital rooms concentrate things. They strip away the ordinary friction and social management that families use in regular settings, the casual conversations and the movement between rooms, and the ability to step outside for air when a moment becomes too much. In a hospital room, you are present and seated, and the person in the bed is the center of the room, and there is nowhere to redirect. You are simply there together with whatever needs to be said. My father looked different, not diminished exactly. He was still physically imposing in the way he had always been, a big-framed man who took up space, but something in his face had shifted. He looked like someone who had recently understood something and was still in the process of figuring out what to do with the understanding. He asked everyone to listen. He said that lying in a hospital bed gives you a kind of time to think that regular life does not make available. He said he had been going through things, his choices, their consequences, what he felt when he looked at them clearly rather than through the lens of what he had needed them to mean at the time. He said there was one thing in this accounting that he could not move past without addressing out loud, in front of the people who needed to hear it. He said my name. He said he had blamed me for the accident for a long time. He said he had known, he used the word known, that Ed's written assessment had been accurate. He said he had not been able to accept it at the time because he was angry and frightened, and it was easier to put the fault on a human cause than to accept that a mechanical failure had simply happened with no one responsible. He said putting that on me had been wrong. He said it had gone on far too long. He said he was sorry. The room went quiet in the specific way of a room full of people who have heard something unexpected and do not yet know how to breathe inside it. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Derek was looking at the floor, not at my father, not at me, at the floor. My Aunt Shirley turned her face toward the window. Nobody said anything. The quiet lasted longer than most silences last. Then my father looked directly at me. He said he was sorry again. The second apology, quieter and more personal than the first, aimed at me specifically, not at the room, in the way of a statement that has moved past the general acknowledgment into something more intimate and more costly. I could see it cost him something real to say it. My father has never been a man who apologizes easily. This was not easy. I said I heard him. I said I was glad he said it. That was all I had to give in that room, in that moment. I was not going to produce a performance of forgiveness I had not yet had time to feel my way toward. I heard him and I told him so, and both of those things were true. I drove home that night on roads I was not paying much attention to, covering distance without particularly intending to, until I found myself somewhere I had not planned to be and turned back. I was trying to understand what the evening had been and what it meant and what it asked of me going forward. There was genuine relief in what had happened. Something released in me when my father said those words in that room. Something I had been holding for so long that I had stopped being aware I was holding it. The way a low constant pressure becomes part of the weather of a life rather than something you notice distinctly. The truth had been said out loud to the people who needed to hear it, and something shifted. There was grief alongside the relief, as there usually is when a long injustice is finally named. Grief for the 17 years that could not be undone, for the version of my family that had never existed and that I had spent 17 years trying to find, for the specific moments, holidays, conversations, phone calls that had been shaped by the false story and that could not be reshaped now, only left behind. And there was an anger that was cleaner and more exact than the general low-level anger I had lived with for years. Because my father had said he had known. Not that he had made a mistake in good faith. Not that he had convinced himself of something wrong. He had known. From relatively early on, he had understood that Ed's assessment was accurate and that I had not caused the accident. And he had chosen the other story anyway. And his family had lived inside that chosen story for 17 years. I sat with all of it for 2 weeks. Then Derek called. It was a Thursday evening. He opened the conversation in the easy, warm way he uses when he has something to ask. A few minutes of genuine seeming catch-up, some questions about my work, what was going on in Richmond. Then he said he had something he wanted to bring up. He was getting married in 8 months. He wanted me there. He was asking me to be his best man. Not, before I ask you anything, I need to say something to you. Not, I know I should have spoken up a long time ago, and I want to acknowledge that. Not, I was driving that day, and I knew what I'd found, and I let 17 years go by without saying the thing that would have changed it for you, and I am sorry. Just, will you be my best man? I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, Derek, I need to ask you directly. Do you acknowledge that the accident was not my fault? He was quiet. Then, Dad already addressed that. I don't think it needs to be rehashed. I sat with those 2 sentences. My father had addressed his part, and Derek was presenting that as the closing of the full account, as though one person's statement in a hospital room had settled the debt for everyone in the room who had been part of building what was built. What about you? I said, separately from what Dad said. Do you have something to say to me, from you? Nathan, I want to move forward. We all do. Dad said what he needed to say. That should let us get to a better place. You were in the car, I said. You were driving. You had 17 years. You never said a word. Your silence was part of what I carried. That is separate from what Dad said in that hospital room. I don't think that's fair. I do. He said he was sorry if I felt that way. He said the family needed to heal. He said the wedding could be a good opportunity for that. He said he hoped I would think about it. I told him I needed some time. I spent 3 days on it. I wrote things down, which is how I work through anything that matters to me. I wrote out what saying yes would mean, showing up as best man, standing at the front of the room, giving a speech, performing closeness and celebration in front of everyone who had been part of 17 years of the other thing, and I asked myself honestly whether that performance was available to me, whether it would be true. My father had apologized, genuinely, publicly, at real personal cost. That mattered enormously, and I did not minimize it. One honest accounting after 17 years of the false one is still an honest accounting. It was real. Derek had not apologized. He had redirected me to his father's words and suggested that they covered the full terrain for everyone. They did not. His silence had been its own thing, a continuous choice, made across 17 years, in moment after moment when he could have said something and did not. He was in the car. He knew what Ed had found. He had access to the same facts my father had pushed back across the kitchen table, and he had chosen, over and over, not to bring them up. On the 3rd day, I called Derek back. I said, I am not going to be your best man, and I am not going to come to the wedding. He said, Nathan, I need you to hear me. I said, this is not a punishment. It is not meant to damage your day. It is the truth about where I am. I cannot stand at the front of a room and give a toast and celebrate as though we are somewhere we have not gotten to yet. We are not there. Your father's statement mattered, and I hold it. But I needed to hear something from you, Derek. Your words. Your acknowledgement. I still do. Until I do, I cannot pretend the distance between us does not exist. He said he thought I was making a mistake. He said the family would be hurt. He said our mother would be devastated. I told him I was sorry for the pain my absence would cause, and I meant that. I told him the door was not closed, that if he wanted to have a real conversation, I was available for it, whenever he was ready, with no deadline. He did not take it then. He has not since. I did not go to the wedding. Derek got married on a Saturday in September, and I spent that day in Richmond, living my life in an ordinary way. I went to the farmer's market. I made something to eat. I watched a film I had been putting off. I was not destroyed. I was not miserable. I was, for the first time in a very long time, a person spending his day in a manner that was consistent with what he actually knew to be true about his life. My mother called the following week. She was hurt and she told me directly, which I respect because she has always been honest about what she feels even when it costs her something. She said she had hoped the wedding could have been a moment for the family to come back together and that my absence had made everything harder. I told her I loved her and that I understood she was in pain. I also told her that I had been asking this family to see something clearly for 17 years and that one statement, though real and important, does not rebuild what 17 years of the opposite constructed. I said Derek had the chance to add his own words to the record and chose not to. I said I could not show up as though that had not happened. She said she wished things were different. I told her I wished that too. I meant it both ways. I wished the wedding had not happened the way it had, and I also wished the 17 years had not happened the way they had. Both of those things are true and both of them matter. That was a year ago. Derek and I have not spoken since. My mother and I talk, carefully, around the edges of the thing neither of us names directly. My father calls occasionally, tentative calls, the calls of a man trying to find his way towards something without being sure of the path. I give him credit for trying. I hold him to what he said in that room. I do not give anyone a free pass, but I do not close doors that might still lead somewhere real. I think about what I would need from Derek to believe we had actually reached a different place. I have been honest with myself about this rather than leaving it vague, because leaving it vague is how people avoid the thing they actually need to say. What I would need is for Derek to say, in his own words, that he knows the accident was not my fault and that he had access to that knowledge for 17 years and chose not to use it, and that choosing not to use it was wrong, and that he is sorry. Not a summary of what our father said. Not an acknowledgement that the situation is complicated and that he had his reasons and that it was a long time ago. His words. His specific admission. About his specific silence. I do not think that is an unreasonable thing to need from someone who was in the car and who knew and who said nothing for 17 years. I think it is the minimum honest thing. And I am waiting, without urgency and without a deadline, to see whether he is capable of it. I am 36 years old. I live my life in Richmond in a way that is, by most measures, a good life. I have work I am competent at, and that gives me real satisfaction. I have a few friends who know me well and who I trust. I have a neighborhood I have been in long enough to belong to it in the easy, unremarkable way that comes from simply being somewhere consistently. I am not living a diminished life. I am not destroyed. I am someone who went through something difficult and came out of it with a clearer understanding of what he is and what he is not willing to participate in. What I do not have is the family I thought I had. I have a version of several of its members, a phone call from my father, a conversation with my mother, the hypothetical possibility of a conversation with my brother that has not happened yet. But the family as I imagined it, the one in which I was a full and fair participant rather than a designated cautionary figure, has never existed in the form I was reaching for. I reached for it for 17 years. I reached and I adjusted and I showed up and I tried in the various ways that try and take shape over a long stretch of time, and it was not there. Stopping the reaching was not defeat. It was accuracy. I think sometimes about what it would have taken to change the course of all of it. It was not complicated. At any point in 17 years, someone could have said a true sentence out loud. My father knew it from early on. Derek knew it, or knew enough of it to know. Either of them, at any Thanksgiving, any Christmas, any phone call, any casual family conversation in which the accident came up the way it periodically did, could have said, actually, the mechanic found a corroded brake line. It was not Nathan. That is the factually accurate version. That sentence, said at any point, would have changed the terrain of 17 years. It was never said. The terrain did not change. I navigated it as best I could for 17 years, and then I stopped navigating it and started building something on different ground. The different ground is this. The truth, which has always existed, which was never actually in question even when the family was living the other version of it. Ed's report, the documented mechanical failure, the fact that an oil change and a brake line are separate systems. I stood on that ground alone for 17 years, and I am standing on it now. Except that now my father is standing on it too, and we are building something small and careful and honest on top of it. I would like Derek to stand on it eventually. I would like my family, over time, to become a group of people who can tell this story accurately, who can say, "We got this wrong for a long time, and we are sorry for what that cost Nathan, and we are building from an honest place now." Whether that happens depends on choices other people have not yet made. I cannot make those choices for them. I can only make mine. My choices, going forward, are these: to be honest about what happened and what it cost, to be available for the real conversations rather than the performances of conversation, to not close doors to people who are genuinely trying to reach something true, and to refuse to perform closeness I do not feel for the comfort of people who have not yet done the work of earning it. That is where I am. What I know clearly at the end of all of it is this: I did not cause that accident. I never did. Ed's assessment documented it from the beginning. My father knew the assessment was accurate and chose the other story anyway, for 17 years, and his family lived inside it for 17 years, and I was the one who bore the weight of it for all of that time. That is the truth. It was the truth when I was 19 years old sitting at a kitchen table pushing a piece of paper toward a man who was not ready to look at it. It has been the truth for every year since. Derek had 17 years in which he could have said something. When the moment finally came, when the best man call gave him the opening to put his own words on the record, he pointed to our father's words and said they should be enough. They were not enough. His silence specifically had been part of what I carried, and what I needed was his voice specifically, accounting for his own silence. The absence of that is a choice he made. I made mine in response. Choices have consequences. That is not cruelty. That is how things work. I do not know what the future of my relationship with Derek is. I do not know whether he will ever find his way to saying the thing he has not said. I am not waiting for it, and I am not putting anything on hold. But if he comes with the real conversation, I will be here for it. Until then, I am here regardless. Working, living, building something with my father, slowly and imperfectly, on terms that require honesty from both of us. Maintaining whatever is possible with my mother, given the current shape of things. Staying available for the real conversation with Derek, if it ever comes, without making the rest of my life contingent on something he has not yet chosen to give. For the first time in 17 years, nobody in my family can tell me I am wrong about what I know, because my father told them all, in a hospital room, that I was right. And that truth does not dissolve back into the silence, just because silence was more comfortable for a long time. I was right. I was right at 19 with Ed's report in my hand. I was right for every year that followed. And I was right when I told Derek that I needed something from him specifically, and that without it, I could not perform a closeness we had not yet actually built. Being right does not restore 17 years. I know that. I have known it for a long time, and I have made my peace with it. Being right is a foundation. It is where you build from when you are ready to build. I am ready to build. I am just waiting for the other people in this story to bring the same honesty I am bringing, so we have something real to build toward rather than something we are only pretending is there. That is where I am today. It is not a triumphant place. It is not the place I would have chosen if I could have chosen any of this, which I could not. But it is an honest place, and honest is something I have not always had from the people around me. And I have learned to value it in a way I might not have if it had always come easily. I value it now. I am not going to trade it away for the performance of a family harmony that does not exist. What exists is what exists, and I am going to be accurate about what that is and let things develop from accuracy rather than from the pretense of something that has not yet been built. Have you ever been blamed for something you did not do by the people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever had the documentation of the truth pushed back across a table because the truth was inconvenient for the story someone else needed to tell? Have you ever been asked to celebrate as though a public apology from one person covered the long silence of everyone else in the room? Leave your story in the comments. Because accountability is not something one person can issue on behalf of everyone. An apology from a father, however real and however necessary, does not close the account of a brother who chose silence for 17 years. Those are two separate debts. And being asked to stand at the front of a room and give a toast and perform joy you do not yet genuinely feel is not an invitation to healing. It is a request to pretend. The pretending is what I spent 17 years doing. I am done with it. I am only interested now in what is actually true. If you believe that 17 years of being the family scapegoat for something you did not cause earns you the right to say no to a best man speech, that you are allowed to decline to perform a closeness you were never actually given, hit that like button and subscribe. Because Nathan was not wrong. He was never wrong. The only wrong in this story lived in 17 years of a family choosing a comfortable story over a documented truth, and in the silence of a brother who had the information and the years and chose neither. He did not owe any of them a performance of resolution he had not yet been given the honest building blocks of. He owed them accuracy. He gave it. That was enough. Hashtag they blamed me for 17 years.